Hi, my name is Shmuelo, and in this talk I will try to convince you or make the case that bias is more dangerous than fake news. We all know that fake news is dangerous, and I'm an inventor. I actually invent in the area of discovering what fake news are. But I will try to convince you that bias, as in you read a high quality newspaper which is either on the left or on the right, is more dangerous to your understanding of the world than fake news is. And I'm not talking about unknown bias. I'm talking about actually known bias. You read the New York Times, you know it's left wing. You think you're protected because it is left wing and it told you it's left wing. And still, I will try to convince you that this is very dangerous to your understanding of the world. I will start with an example which will be made clear very soon on when bias is important for my professional work in IBM. When I joined IBM 24 years ago, I could have chosen which problem to work on, and the problem that I chose was how to make sure that CPUs are very well tested. And the main way to find bugs in CPUs and make sure that they are very well tested, which is very important because every single bug found by the customer could cost maybe $500 million. So we want to produce code or CPUs in which the customer never finds a bug, is using the idea of automatic test generation. So we have a tool called an automatic test generation, and it generates programs which will be executed on the processor. We also have something very important, which is called a reference model. A reference model is something that can execute those programs and should reach the same results as the processor, but was created independently. It doesn't have to be as high quality. It doesn't have to be as good performance, but it should get the same results. So what you do when you want to test a processor, you have an automatic test generator, a program on which 100 people worked, and it generates tests, and those tests are executed by an entire floor of computers, both on the program and on the reference model. The results are compared. If it's the same, then fine. If it's not the same, then there is a problem. And the problem could be that the program is wrong, which is why we did this exercise to begin with, to find problems. Or it could be that the reference model is wrong, and then we fix the reference model. Or it could be that something in the process is wrong. Maybe the test generator generates a wrong test, or the comparison works wrongly, but we fix it. So what could be the problems, important problems in the system? You could have bugs in the program or the reference model, which is fine, that's the goal. It could be that the reference model is not written independently and therefore would have the same bug as the program. And therefore, when the test is run, I don't say that it's wrong because both of them create the same bug. When you compare them, you get the same result. This could be, and it's rare, and to do that, we write the reference model independently. The biggest problem we could have, the most important problem here, is that the automatic test generator does not generate all the tests that it can. And how would you know? You see lots of tests. In this case, even 24 years ago, it was 200 million tests a day. But do you generate all the tests that you can? So what I did is I started an area called functional coverage, and I checked that the program does things. I want a view to see what it does. For example, I checked that it does every instruction, of which there are 400, and immediately I found out that 7 instructions, because of a bug, it did not generate. So we never know. We never tested them, even though we put all this effort, and some of them in some other things. So the big things that you can have, the big mistakes that you can have, a really important one, is that you don't see the world because some of the things are just not brought to your attention. This is a bias, and it's really hard to know what it is that you don't know. If we look at the world generates news, and the news are reported both on the right and on the left. For example, on the left, they're reported on CNN and New York Times, on the right on Fox. Both of them are reported both in your Facebook and Twitter. You can see your friends reporting them. If the same event is reported in both, you can compare them and see if somebody is cheating. If one of them says something really important that the other one does not say and it becomes news, then the other side will also report it and you can compare them. But in addition, both sides will figure out what's important and what's important to them, and they will report things that the other side does not report. So if you listen to news on one side or the other, you live in a bubble, and you know things that the other side doesn't know, and you don't know things that they do. So you live in two different worlds, and therefore you could come up with totally different understanding of the world because your facts are different. So we try to understand the world, and we make theories about it. For example, a theory could be that terrorism is due to lack of education, or whatever. The way you figure out if a theory is correct or wrong in scientific theory is a theory is something that can be wrong, you can show it to be wrong, and you find facts which do not agree with it. So for example, I'll have this simple theory: I'm tall, I'm smart, therefore all tall people are smart. That's a theory. And of course, it's really hard to find a fact that would show this theory to be wrong. But the problem is that if your news source is biased, you will never see those counterexamples. They will show you only good facts, facts that support your theory. And if a fact does not support your theory, then it's not going to be shown. This is not fake news, they just don't show you some stuff. So for example, let's assume you have a theory that all members of some group, Jews, Muslims, American bankers, all of them are nasty. And you see confirmation, then this theory is never challenged, and you continue to believe it because you don't see counterexamples. Many people actively avoid news that they don't like. That's not a lecture for them. And other people would like fake news that support your news, also not a lecture for them. So I'll give you an example of a partial stories that form the way we think about things because we miss information. And I'm going to choose a very loaded subject, which is slavery. And when we think of slavery, the first thing that comes to mind is the really evil things that were done to black people when they were taken to the United States. So people were taken from Africa, black people, and they were transported. About a tenth of them died on the way, and they got to the United States. And this is sort of the story of slavery as we think about it. But the story is actually much bigger than that, because the number of people that were taken to the United States is about 400 to 500,000. So it's a big number and it's a big story. But 5 million were taken to Brazil, and 5 million were taken to the Caribbean. And 15 millions, I'm talking about blacks from Africa, were taken as slaves to Muslim countries. And in addition, 4 million white people were taken from Russia and the Slavic or slave countries to Turkey. And even less known is that the Berber slavery, 1 million people were taken from Italy and Spain to North Africa. White people were taken to be slaves of Muslims in North Africa, all in the same period of the slavery in the United States. So we know of an important story, but the reason we think only about that when we think about slavery is this is all the information that we get. We are not told why there were no fishing villages in Italy and in Spain next to the beach because it was too dangerous to be taken as slaves. We are not talked about the slavery that comes to the Islamic country. We are told about, in numbers, 1% of the story. And there are conclusions. For example, if you look at headlines, then the black people in the United States would be totally anti-white because of the experience, and for the Muslims. And they are for the Muslims because they don't listen to the story, or they are aware of only a small part of it. I'm going to talk now about an article by Mati Friedman, who was a journalist for AP. And he talked about the most important story on earth, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And why is this the most important story on earth? It's the most important story on earth because there are more journalists in Israel than there are in China or India or Russia or entire Africa or all the Arab countries. So you get lots more reporting on it than on other stories, and therefore it's the most important story. Is this the most important story in any other way? So a lot more people die in Chicago from shootings than in Israel and the Palestinian territories. And we don't hear about that because it's a lot less important, a lot less reporters. Another thing that makes it an interesting story is the framing. So Israel, you could think about the Israeli-Arab conflict, which will not be all that interesting because Israel is only 0.2%. You can't put Israel as the bad mean guy when you compare it to something so much bigger in number of people and in territory. So you compare Israel, which is very tiny, to an even tinier place, which is Palestine, and you frame it this way. You don't talk about the Israeli-Arab, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The story is about bad things that are happening, that are done by Israel. If the Palestinians are doing bad things, it's not interesting. If corruption happens in Israel, it's interesting. If corruption happens in Palestine, it's not interesting. The story is further biased, not only by what the people want to report and by the number of reporters, by the fact that some of them things are not allowed to report. So something, if you want to report from Gaza, you have to confirm to the Hamas what they want you to report. And you're not even telling your audience that you can't report things because otherwise you will either get out of Gaza or die. So you don't say things about bad things about the Hamas, for example, shooting from schools, unless you see them from very minor news sources, which didn't get the feedback that they need to get it, and and they're like Italian or Finnish news sources. The majors don't report things that they're not supposed to report, and they're not reporting that there is a bias. The last quote here is from the article, and he's giving an example. In 2007, Olmert decided to give back a negotiation all 100% of the 67. It's not exactly the 100% of 67, but he would give back some parts of Israel to confiscate from the parts that he takes. And the reporters found the maps, they found about the story, but they were told they would not be allowed to report it because it's not an interesting story. The story is supposed to be that the Palestinians are moderate and the Israelis are increasingly extreme, and this does not show it because the Palestinians refused this offer, which was considered a very good offer. So this just was not reported because it's not interesting. Again, nothing fake about not reporting it. It's bias. You're not reporting something that's not fake because you're not saying anything incorrect. You're just not saying the correct things. So I'm going to give two comments about how the BBC reports because I follow the BBC daily. So for example, if, but it's not only the BBC, of course. If the Hamas shoot rockets at Israel from Gaza, 20,000 such rockets have been shot about. This is not news. It will continue to shoot rockets and it will not be news. And when Israel will shoot back, then it will become news, and the news will say Israel attacked Gaza. And it might say in a subline, due to rockets being shot from Gaza. But not by whom or anything. So this is one example of bias. Another example of bias is that there is this article, which was 5 days ago in the BBC, about the frightening network of Islamic spies in Somalia. And what it talks about is how dangerous. It makes you feel good for how brave are the reporters of the BBC in Somalia, because they say that every day we get a report on what we're doing, and the report could be you woke up at 6:50 in the hotel, you ordered this, you went to the bank, you were wearing a green shirt, you opened an account. You went out, let me tell you that your bodyguards are doing a really bad job because when you went out, they were drinking coffee and not looking at you. I could have killed you at this time, and so forth and so on. And there is this report that's saying we are being intimidated. The reporters is we are being intimidated. So we are brave, we are still reporting. But what it doesn't tell you is why they are being intimidated and what is the result. My assumption is, I don't know anything about Somalia. My assumption is that the jihadist terrorist group does not want BBC to report something, and the BBC indeed does not report that. We don't know what it is that they don't want them to report, and we will never see the reports. At least in Somalia, they were brave enough to say we are being intimidated. In Gaza, they don't even say that. But okay, so now I want to know what's going on in Somalia, and how would I know? I have to spend a huge amount of effort I do in Gaza to figure out what's going on in Somalia, and I don't really care enough about what's happening in Somalia to know, and the BBC is not going to tell me, or the other news sources. Another example. In December of 2017, Politico, which is a very good reporting paper, not specifically left or right, it reports, and every time it reports, somebody hates it for what it reports, had a big report about something that happened in 2015. And what happened in 2015 was that the Justice Department was having a very big case of the Hezbollah selling drugs in the United States, and they wanted to arrest them. And the White House told them not to, because if they would arrest them, this might hurt the nuclear deals that they were trying to sign at the time with Iran. So they didn't arrest them. And this is the story was about that. And I published a story, and I published that I think you will, if your sources are the CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, you will never hear about that. And my friend said no, and if I don't hear about it, it's because it's fake news and so forth. 2 days later, the majors, the other majors, which are sort of in the middle, will publish this news. They're not going to publish it immediately because they have to verify it. It takes a day or two, and they verify it, and you see that the Wall Street Journal, the NPR, and all of those publish this news. The New York Times and the BBC and the CNN are still nothing. So my friends are getting checking things. You can see that somebody saying in Finnish in Norwegian news, nothing is mentioned about it. And they start to worry about the fact that they don't get the news that they should. A week later, the New York Times had to say something about it. It was the biggest news at the time in the world. And it says, basically, it published saying, it's not a really good article, and it's not very important news, and let's go look at something else. You see this often, actually, that some news which are the biggest on the left or the right are just not seen. They are really important news, but if you don't verify your news sources, you will never hear about them. So what is it that you can do about it? It's really difficult. So bias is difficult to fight. You have to put effort, and you can't do much. But what you can do is try to puncture your bubble. And you should do it by reading news sources that you don't like. And the other thing is you can follow Facebook friends that you don't agree with, and they might put into your attention things that are interesting to them, which could be interesting to you, but will never appear in your bubble. So what do? I follow a few topics very closely on which I read all the sources. And I know I can't do it on others, so I try not. I don't really have good opinions about what's happening in Ukraine or Somalia because I know people are having bias. So I read the news, but I will not try to convince people because I just don't know. I read the news that I don't like every day, so I read Al Jazeera every day, and I read other sources that I don't like, but I want to see what they say. I go to workshops by groups that I don't agree with. I follow the links. And often, as a result, due to my publishing in Facebook, I am that Facebook brand for my friends who want to know about things that they would not get in their own news sources. So I hope by now I convinced you that bias is really dangerous, and you should, and it's more dangerous than fake news because fake news is easy to spot. Bias is really difficult to spot, and that you should try to find other news sources that you don't agree with. This was the talk, and now I'll go to bonus slide because after all, I'm an inventor. So I will talk about other uses for reference in my invention. So the first one on the right is about augmented reality. So assume you have an augmented reality glasses. This is maybe 4 years into the future. I mean, they already exist, but on your eyes. And augmented reality glasses does all sorts of things. It changed the road to green. It changed dogs to cats. It changed the language of the signs into English and so forth. And you're driving along as because of your augmented reality, you have an accident. How could that happen? Well, one way is there could be a bug in the augmented reality. For example, they cover the road with green grass, but they also cover the hole in the road and you didn't see it and you fell into it with your car. Another thing that could be possible is that somebody that wrote the application is malicious and doesn't like you. So, for example, the application does whatever it's supposed to do, like change cats into dogs, but it also raises kids in your own street. So how can you protect yourself from such problem due to augmented reality if you want to use it. One way to do it is to use a reference model. So what the world as can be seen by you without the glasses is known because you have a camera on you. And the world as seen by you is also known because this is what the device shows you. And the question is, those two things are very different, but the question is the difference dangerous? Is the difference important to your driving? So what you could do is you could take a software that is meant for driving cars, for autonomous driving cars, and run it both on the world as it is and on the world as you see it. And if the two driving software get to the same results, then it's fine. So for example, if you change a cat to a dog, both of them either run around it or run over it, doesn't matter. They do the same thing, everything is fine. But if one of them does something else than the other, you know that the change is due to the augmentation. So for example, if you changed a kid into a dog, then one of them would run over it and the other one would run around it. And when they don't agree, you take off the augmentation because you want to be driving in the real world. The second example is when you're watching a football game. So let's assume you're watching a football game on TV and you want to tell the player what to do. So you tell Ronaldo whom to pass the ball to, and you give him a really great idea, but he ignores you. You would want him to actually reply to you. So what you could do is when you press the button, you want to tell him something, then the screen splits and you see the game twice. And so far nothing exciting happens because you see the same game and it's just playing twice. But the one on the right is not a real game, but it's a computer game where the players are doing the same thing as in the real game. Once you want to tell Ronaldo what to do, you can, in the computer game, tell him what to do. And then the two games, you started from a computer game that started at the same position as the real game was playing, and now they will be diverging. After 30 seconds, there will be no relationship between the two games. So you can kill your computer game and continue to watch the real game. And in the end, what you can do is ask which Ronaldo is smarter, mine, the simulated one, the reference model one, or the real one. So thanks for listening, and be happy for comments, and hope you enjoyed.